As Jerry has said, I'm with the Commission. Prior to working with the Commission, I've been with the Commission for 6 years now. I'm no longer, as that title suggests, a national expert. I'm now what we call a fonctionnaire, full-time with the Commission. Prior to that, I worked with John, or should I say to John, in Comreg and then in various Irish government departments. What I would like to do today is to give you an overview of the new regulatory framework, particularly from the point of view of the single market, which is its key objective. Now, there are three ways in which I think we would see the framework contributing to the development of the single market. The first is in terms of consistency. So I'll highlight some points relating to the consistency issue in the new framework. Secondly, there's spectrum. I'll briefly say a few words about spectrum. And thirdly, there are the consumer citizens' rights issues. And then I'll conclude with an overview of the main tasks that we see going forward following on from the framework. So, just to start with the single market and to ask ourselves the question, how much of it have we achieved so far? Well, although we've achieved, I think, quite a lot in terms of consumer benefits, in our view, there's still a lot more to be done. We have still 27 separate markets, really, within the EU. We have national networks. Spectrum still remains largely the domain of the member states. Roaming is a good example. It's perceived as a single market issue. On the other hand, about 80% of all subscribers in the EU subscribe to one of the four main mobile operators in the EU, and equally in the fixed market, the larger operators are present in most member states, but they have to face 27 different regulatory regime across the member states. So, I suppose in summary I would say we've come some way, but there's more to be done. How does the new framework bring us further along this road? Well, first, in terms of consistency, I'll highlight three examples here. The NRAs have the power, for example, to impose functional separation on an operator, a vertically integrated operator in a national market. Now, the new framework lays down the criteria for them to impose this. This is still, though, a remedy, as we would see it, of last resort. And it must be, when an NRA goes down this road, they must seek the approval of the Commission to impose such a remedy. And the new EU body Barrack will have a role in relation to that. Another area through which consistency will be enhanced is the area of what we call symmetrical remedies. Now, these remedies, I'm thinking specifically here of the new Article 12 of the Framework Directive, which allows NRAs to impose obligations on a symmetrical basis relating to ducts and in-building wiring for access. You then, more generally, you have the increased Commission oversight under Article 7A. I'll come to that in a moment. And you have also then the Article 19 harmonisation measures, whereby the Commission, if the general approaches to consistency don't work, and there is a lack of consistency which is an impediment to the single market, an actual barrier to the single market, the Commission, after a period of time, can come forward with harmonisation measures, decisions under Article 19. And then you have the new procedures under Barrack and the Barrack office. Now, as you know, the Commission had sought a veto in relation to the remedies that the Member States or the NRAs can impose. when regulating the market. We already have a veto in relation to market definition and significant market power. And our proposals to the Commission, we proposed for ourselves a remedy in relation to vetoes. And that's not quite the way it ended up. But the compromise outcome involves new procedures for notification of draft measures, including the possibility for a Commission recommendation. Now, Barrack will play a central role in relation to this new procedure. But basically, where a national regulatory authority decides on certain remedies, the Commission has serious doubts, so it goes into second phase in relation to these remedies. Barrack will be invited to give an opinion. If after a period of 3 months the NRA has not responded to the serious doubts by either amending or withdrawing the regulation, the Commission can come forward with a recommendation, whether Barrack agrees or not. But I think the outcome is here, the important point is here, it'll have to produce a reasoned justification. So you have a new situation here now where an NRA, which wants to, in a sense, plough its own furrow, if it will be under enormous pressure from both Barrack, the other national regulatory authorities, and the Commission. It'll be very difficult for it to proceed where that weight of opinion is against it. So I'm reluctant to use the term, but you could perhaps describe it as a soft veto. It's not quite the veto that the Commission were looking for, but nevertheless, I think the measures that we have will ensure greater consistency at the end of the day. These are the new institutional arrangements. In some ways, they haven't changed that much. The key change here is that the Communications Committee, which is an advisory committee to the Commission, insofar as the Article 7 notifications are concerned, notifications relating to market analysis, SMP and remedies, the role that the consultative role that the Communications Committee had previously will now be replaced by Barrack. Obviously, the European Regulators Group is going to be replaced by Barrack in its entirety. And there are some changes to the functioning of the Radio Spectrum Policy Group. But broadly, this is the new institutional arrangements under the new framework. I'm not going to say too much about Barrack because I know John will be very anxious to talk about that. But just to mention a couple of points. Previously you have the ERG. There are some key changes, obviously, between the ERG and Barrack. First of all, I would point to the words official mission. Barrack now has tasks which are enshrined in law. These tasks are clearly defined. It must come to positions based on a 2/3 majority, as opposed to the previous sort of consensus principle which applied within ERG. So there are significant differences between ERG and Barrack. And Barrack will be accountable, of course, to the Parliament, to the Commission. The Commission will produce a report on its functioning after 3 years, and to the Council. I should say that in terms of Barrack, the actual term Barrack describes the 27 national regulatory authorities, as I understand it. But for legal reasons, the community body, or after Lisbon, we don't use the word community anymore, it's the EU body, is actually the Barrack office, which supports the 27 national regulators who will actually take the decisions. I'll let John say a little bit more about that. Finally, in relation to what I would call strengthening the national regulatory systems, and again, this is relating to achieving greater consistency, because you cannot achieve that unless you have strong regulatory systems. I would just like to highlight 3 points. First of all, there's the question of independence of national regulatory authorities. This hasn't been a huge issue in Ireland so far. Nevertheless, it is an issue in some member states for the Commission. And there are 2 points here under independence. First of all, there can't be any arbitrary dismissal of the head of an NRA unless he or she no longer fulfills the conditions under which they were employed in the first place. The NRA cannot take instructions from any other body, of course with the exception of the courts. NRAs have to be properly resourced, adequate financial and human resources, and separate budgets. And then appeals. Now, there are common criteria for appeals laid out in the recitals in the new framework, but there are difficulties, obviously, because of constitutional issues, I think, with having a standardised approach to appeals across the 27 member states. Initially, the Commission had put proposals into the substantive text itself, but they ended up in the recitals. Just briefly, in terms of the second area where we're trying to move forward in terms of the single market, and this is a European spectrum policy. Now, I would just note three changes that have occurred in relation under the new framework. I think it's fair to say the reforms in terms of spectrum that are in the new framework probably didn't go as far as the Commission would have liked, but it's worth highlighting these points. The first is that there's a stronger emphasis on technology and service flexibility in the new framework. Spectrum trading is now allowed. The details to be worked out and bands to be determined, which will be a job for the Radio Spectrum Committee. And then there's this new idea of the Radio Spectrum Policy Programme, which is a multi-annual strategic political level planning programme for spectrum policy, whereby the Commission will bring forward proposals to the Council and the Parliament on, I'm not sure how regular the period is. It's multi-annual, so it could be 2 or 3 years, every 2 or 3 years. Bring forward these proposals, which will identify its policy priorities in relation to the management of spectrum going forward, and these will obviously be discussed in the Council and Parliament. So it gives the whole issue of spectrum, it raises the level in terms of the debate on the future strategic priorities. Now, in relation to that, we will have a Spectrum Summit. The Commission is planning a Spectrum Summit. I'm not sure who the invitees to that will be, but if you keep your eyes and ears open, this is likely to take place in the spring. And the discussions at this Spectrum Summit are meant to inform what might be contained within the first radio spectrum policy programme. I mean, ideas for this could include how to move forward with the digital dividend, the international dimension of spectrum, ensuring we have a coordinated approach within the EU, in the ITU, for example. There are many things, I'm sure, that could be included in this. The third plank, if you like, of the framework relating to ensuring or enhancing the single market is the whole area of citizens' rights. Now, there's a lot in the framework under this heading. I'm just going to highlight a few points. Some very specific ones. First of all, number portability must take place now for fixed and mobile networks within 1 day. You then have this issue of numbers of social value, which member states are now required to promote specific 116 numbers. The most probably well-known 116 number is the missing child line, which is 116000. There's a child line number. There are also sort of social services numbers. These are standardized numbers across Europe. There's an obligation now to promote usage of these numbers, encourage their provision, and to ensure citizens are adequately informed. 112 is another really important number. It's the Pan-European Emergency Number, and the new framework extends the access requirements from traditional telephony to new technologies. It strengthens the provision on providing caller location for 112, and again requires measures to improve general awareness. I just saw something there before I left Brussels, which shows that the level of awareness in the EU on 112 is around 24% of the population. Ireland is around 18%, so we're a little bit below the average, so probably need to do a bit more on that. So these are some key elements, specific measures relating to citizens' rights in the new framework. You then have issues which are likely to give rise. These are very, very topical, sensitive issues which are likely to give rise to significant debate and a lot more work over the coming years. First of all, in relation to context and transparency, the framework requires improvements in the information that's given to consumers related to quality, access to services, and probably most crucially, any conditions limiting access to telecom services. Then you have these, maybe like two sides of the same coin, these two terms, net freedoms and net neutrality. And there was obviously a lot of debate on these issues prior to the agreement on this framework. Some of you will know about the Amendment 138 debate. But basically, the way I would see this is, first of all, in terms of net freedoms, what are the outcomes? Well, Article 1 of the Framework Directive, there was a lot of attention focused on this wording. It sums up, I suppose, the general position in relation to net freedoms, which is actions taken by member states to restrict access must respect fundamental rights and freedoms as laid down in the European Convention on Human Rights. It's quite general. Secondly, Article 8 of the Framework Directive requires NRAs to promote the ability of end users to access and distribute information or to run applications of their choices on the internet. Net neutrality, on the other hand, is covered to some extent by the contracts and transparency point that I mentioned earlier on. In other words, that customers have to be informed if there are any conditions restricting their ability to access the internet. And secondly, NRAs, national regulatory authorities, have the power to set minimum quality levels in relation to traffic. This could turn out to be a crucial issue going forward. Copyright on telecoms. There's going to be you're going to hear a lot about copyright over the coming years. The framework is quite general on this. It talks about information must be provided to consumers on the consequences of breaching copyright. It encourages cooperation between rights holders and ISPs. E-privacy. Key change here is that if there is a breach of e-privacy, in other words, a customer's data is lost, the relevant authorities must be notified by the operator, as well as, in some circumstances, the customer themselves. We also have new measures on spam and other issues like malware, spyware, cookies. These are all issues which are hugely important in terms of consumers' trust in using these services, and that these services new services are going to take off, justifying the rollout of next generation access networks. We need to have consumers' trust in using the internet. So, there you have three main planks: consistency, greater consistency, spectrum, and consumers' and citizens' rights. Where does the framework now leave us going forward in terms of the single market? Well, as I said at the start, it's still a work in progress. Some significant steps, but a lot more to do. Harmonisation will proceed under the Article 7 mechanisms that have now been put in place, possibly using Article 19 where necessary. But at the moment, national borders still persist. One point is, in terms of harmonisation, the framework actually gives member states flexibility to, in the future, define broadband as part of the scope of universal service. I'll come back to that in a moment. But questions we have to ask ourselves now is, what is the best way forward on key issues such as spectrum management? And this will feature as part of the Radio Spectrum Policy Programme. And it's fair to say member states and industry do not always display or share our great enthusiasm for this. The main deliverables going forward, I'll run through these very quickly. First is transposition of the new framework. This new framework becomes law in the Member States when it's transposed, which will be at the end of May 2011. We have to establish a fully functioning Barrack and Barrack office, and work is already underway with the Commission and the NRAs to set Barrack in motion. You will be aware that in terms of broadband, we are coming forward, the Commission will come forward with a recommendation on next generation access. That will be adopted this year. I can't say precisely when. As you know, our new Commissioner, I think, officially starts work as Information Society Commissioner tomorrow. And we'll see what views she has in relation to some of these major issues. But I think you can take it that we will be coming forward with that recommendation. I mentioned universal service a moment ago. The question as to the inclusion of broadband within the scope of universal service, that obviously raises huge issues in terms of the approaches that Member States might take to this. They have the freedom to do it now. How will it happen? And most crucially, who will pay for it? These are big questions to be addressed. We will be coming forward with a report on the future of universal service also this year. The Commission made a declaration which was published in the official journal relating to net neutrality. We have to follow up on that report now. The report will focus on additional guidance, which I cannot give you here today, on what net neutrality means, what issues it raises, what actions might be necessary to deal with issues of net neutrality or net freedoms. But we will be coming with a report on that. I mentioned also we will be coming with a proposal in the spring on the first radio spectrum policy programme, which will follow this summit that I was talking about. We will come forward also with a communication on privacy and trust. That will deal with many issues. We're trying to decide internally ourselves what exactly it will deal with, but things like use of IP addresses, behavioural advertising. Some of you may have heard of this Form case in the UK, which has raised certain questions and caused concern. The Commission is actually engaged in an infringement process relating to that. A lot of big issues will be dealt with in that communication. And then an area that's close to my own heart, roaming. We will, of course, be reviewing our roaming regulation, and we come with an interim report on that in June of this year. And that's basically it for me. So sort of a quick run through what is 5 directives in 14 slides. But if you have any questions which aren't too detailed, I'll be happy to answer them. And if I can't answer them, we can always follow up later in the panel discussion.
Well, look, thank you very much for that, Stephen.